MEL's hole is a circular structure about 10 feet in diameter. The well is surrounded by a stone wall that goes down about 16 feet. After that, it's impossible to see because of the darkness. As I mentioned earlier, no one knows how long the well has been there, but both Mel Waters and his neighbors have been throwing all sorts of garbage into it for years. You also can't hear the objects hitting the bottom. If you yell into it, your voice doesn't echo either. These events made Mel even more curious. Our hero rolled up his sleeves to measure the depth of the well. Mel went to a local fishing supply store and bought a long fishing line. He tied a 2-pound weight to the end of it and started to lower it into the well. The fishing line ran out, but Mel still hadn't reached the bottom. And don't think it was just a short fishing line. It was a 600-foot fishing line. It still hadn't touched the bottom. Mel thought that maybe the fishing line was wet, and that's why he couldn't reach the bottom. So he attached sponges to the weight and lowered it again, but there was no water where the fishing line ended. The sponges came up dry. Mel's curiosity grew even more. He bought several more fishing lines and tied them all together, end to end. The result? He lowered the lines down for over 12 miles, but they never hit the bottom. While Mel was conducting this experiment, he noticed that his dogs wouldn't come near him. And it wasn't just dogs. Not a bird, not an insect. There wasn't a single living creature near the well. Mel told his neighbors about it, and they said that their dogs wouldn't go near the well either. But then one of his neighbors told a story that terrified everyone. The neighbor said that a few weeks ago, one of his dogs had died and he had thrown the body into the well. However, a few days later, he saw the dog that had died a few days ago at the entrance of his farm, and it was alive. A few days had passed since Mel's neighbor threw his dead dog into the well. He saw the dog running around in the entrance of his farm. The farmer recognized his dog immediately because it was still wearing its collar. But there was something different about the dog. It didn't respond when its owner called it. It was as if it didn't recognize him and continued to wander around the forest on its own. This event, combined with the fact that Mel's lines never reached the bottom of the well, made Mel decide to seek help from someone. Mel got in touch with Art Bell on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. This famous radio show had over 10 million listeners worldwide. Mel sent a message to the show on February 21st, 1997 about what he had experienced. Of course, Art Bell called Mel right back, and the story instantly became a case followed by millions. When Mel went from town to his property, he saw that the area was closed off. And unfortunately, it wasn't curious people who had heard Mel's story who had come. It was the US Army, and the Army wanted only one thing: to take possession of this mysterious well. One of the details Mel gave on the radio was that although there were no living creatures around the well, the vegetation tended to grow very fast and lush. Apart from that, when we took a radio near the well, although there was static at first, after a little adjustment, we started to receive some signals. According to Mel, one of these strange signals he received belonged to a radio station playing very old songs. He was really receiving signals from a channel from the past. Mel played around with the channels a little more and came across a basketball game. But the game wasn't from 1997. It was a broadcast of a game played exactly 30 years ago. Mel was communicating with Art Bell from the town of Edinburgh, and when he returned to his property after the broadcast, he saw that the army had blockaded the area. And they were armed to the teeth. The officials told Mel that a military cargo plane had crashed on his property, and that's why it was blockaded, but there was no wreckage or smoke. Mel didn't believe it and caused a scene, saying he wanted to speak to someone in charge. An official in civilian clothes arrived and informed Mel that the property no longer belonged to him. They openly threatened him, saying that if he caused any trouble, they could easily find evidence that he was producing illegal substances on his property. Mel said that he would tell the press about it, but the official didn't care and said, "Go ahead, no one will believe you." So Mel went back to the only audience he believed would believe him and told his story on Coast to Coast AM, but that's not all. After the military arrived, one of his neighbors contacted Mel. and said that he had seen a jet black light rising from the well into the clouds. Mel said on the radio that he hadn't seen it himself, but his neighbor claimed to have seen it. The listeners also had some ideas about the well. Some said that the area was a UFO hotspot. Others claimed that the well might be located on one of the energy lines called ley lines, and that it could be a time portal. They attributed the disappearance of the objects thrown into it to this. An elderly neighbor even said that there used to be columns around the well many years ago, but they had collapsed over time. After sharing all this information, Mel took a break from the show, saying he would try to find out what was going on and give new details on the next show. But when the next show's date arrived, Mel couldn't be reached. What's worse, no one could reach Mel.